It's our stories. Welcome to a world where real stories sounds like a movie script.
I remember that night like it's etched into my skin. Vanessa had just been promoted to senior marketing coordinator, and I was proud, truly proud. I wanted to celebrate her achievement, to make her feel special. So I suggested a dinner at one of the nicest steakhouses downtown. I planned to cover the whole table, thinking this would be a night of laughter, warmth, and shared happiness. I had imagined her smile as I handed her the menu, the way her eyes would light up when she saw her favorite dishes. I thought we'd create a memory that we could replay in our heads for years to come. But life has a way of complicating the best laid plans. The moment we entered the restaurant, I felt that shift, the subtle tightening in my chest that warned me something wasn't right. The place was beautiful. Dim amber lights cast shadows across the wooden tables. The scent of seared meat and rosemary floated through the air. The soft clatter of glasses and the murmur of other diners added a layer of normalcy, almost soothing. I took a deep breath, imagining that tonight would be different, that it would be perfect. Vanessa's friends were already there when we arrived. Meredith, Jasmine, and Bianca. They had been a presence in Vanessa's life for years, and I had tolerated them barely. Over time, their comments about me had started small. A joke about my job as an electrician, a quip about restoring motorcycles, sometimes even a remark about my clothes or hobbies. At first, I had brushed it off, thinking it was harmless teasing. Vanessa always laughed along, though secretly she would whisper that they didn't mean any real harm. That night, however, everything changed. From the moment we sat down, the subtle digs began to pile up. Meredith made a comment about my work, implying that wiring and circuits were simple, that anyone could do it. I felt a familiar surge of defensiveness, but I swallowed it. It wasn't worth starting a scene, at least that's what I kept telling myself. Jasmine commented on my motorcycles, asking about the money wasted on restoring old bikes. Bianca, always sharp, made remarks, comparing me to Vanessa's successful male friends, insinuating that I wasn't ambitious enough. Each laugh from them felt like a stab, like an audience collectively pointing at me and reminding me of my place. Vanessa, seated across from me, smiled, but it wasn't the smile that said, "I'm on your side." It was polite, the kind of smile that allows someone else's cruelty to pass while maintaining the illusion of harmony. I watched her, hoping she would defend me, hoping she would say something, anything, to make them stop. But she didn't. She sat there, nodding, sipping her drink, occasionally laughing at the jokes, her eyes never meeting mine. And with every passing minute, I felt smaller, shrinking under the weight of their amusement. By the time the main course arrived, I was tense. My fingers tapped nervously against the edge of the table. The restaurant's warmth felt suffocating, and the chatter of the other diners became a background hum to the noise of my own thoughts. I thought about my work, about the hours I had spent restoring that '78 Honda, about the countless nights spent perfecting the electrical wiring in homes, ensuring safety and precision. All that effort, all that pride, and here they were, dismissing it as trivial. The jokes escalated. They were no longer subtle, no longer lighthearted. They attacked my intelligence, my appearance, my hobbies, my ambitions. Each remark was carefully aimed to make me feel inferior, to highlight the differences between me and their polished, corporate, successful friends. Vanessa continued to laugh along, her laughter a thin veneer over what I now recognized as discomfort. I couldn't pinpoint whether she was nervous, embarrassed, or simply conditioned to tolerate their cruelty. And then Vanessa said it, not loud, not in anger, just matter-of-factly. She told me that if I didn't like her friends' jokes, I could simply pay for my meal and leave. I remember the words sinking in slowly, like a rock dropping into deep water. I was stunned, my mind racing. All the humiliation, all the frustration I had bottled up over months, years even, surged forward at once. I realized that I had been treated as a punchline, quietly enduring the ridicule while Vanessa did nothing to intervene. And now, here was the opportunity to reclaim my dignity. I paid only for my portion of the meal, carefully counting the cash for my plate and tip, leaving it on the table. No words were exchanged. I simply got up and walked out. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the laughter, the conversation, the clinking of cutlery, faded behind me as I stepped into the cool night air. I could feel the tension leaving my shoulders, replaced with a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. I had walked away from what was supposed to be a celebration, but in doing so, I felt as if I had regained something far more valuable than a night out or a fancy dinner. My self-respect. Sitting in my car afterward, engine running, headlights. Cutting through the dark, I replayed every moment in my mind. I thought about Vanessa, about her friends, about all the subtle and not so subtle ways they had undermined me over the years. I thought about how easy it had been to tolerate it, to excuse it, to laugh along quietly while taking the brunt of the mockery. And I realized, sitting there alone in the quiet hum of my car, that I wasn't willing to do that anymore. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't feel angry in a frantic, explosive way. I felt calm, centered, resolute. I had drawn a line. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life from people who didn't respect me. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. Sometimes the right choice isn't the one that maintains appearances or spares temporary discomfort. Sometimes the right choice is simply to stand up for yourself, even if it means walking away from the people you care about. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The engine was running, but I wasn't going anywhere. I stared at the dark streets, at the reflections of streetlights bouncing off the wet pavement, trying to process everything that had just happened. My heart was still racing, and yet a strange calm had settled over me. The weight I'd been carrying for years, the silent resentment, the endless attempts to make everyone else comfortable at my expense, suddenly felt lighter. Vanessa's promotion was supposed to be a reason to celebrate, a reason to feel proud. Instead, it had become a mirror reflecting all the ways I had been minimized, dismissed, and mocked, all while smiling politely and pretending everything was fine. I thought about how long I had tolerated her friends' remarks. Every comment, every joke, every side glance that implied I was less than had been stored somewhere in my mind, and tonight it had all spilled over. The first few texts came as soon as I had parked in a quiet lot. Vanessa's name lit up my screen repeatedly, each message more urgent than the last. I didn't answer. I needed to think. I needed space. They were furious, obviously, that I had taken her suggestion literally. And that was when it hit me. All the years of quietly excusing their behavior, of forcing myself to sit through jokes and comparisons, had been a setup, a slow, calculated erosion of my confidence and self-worth. And I had finally drawn a line. My phone kept buzzing, relentless. Messages from Vanessa, from her friends, escalating from confused and hurt to angry and demanding. They couldn't comprehend that I had actually left, that I hadn't done anything dramatic or impulsive. I had simply followed the option I was given. I had paid for my food, nothing more, and walked away. I thought about the money. The bill for the table had been close to $400. Expensive steaks, cocktails, desserts. Vanessa had insisted I cover it all. I had paid $60 for my portion and left, and now I was apparently the villain in the story. I realized then how twisted the situation had become. It wasn't about the food or the money. It was about control, about status, about their need to belittle me while pretending it was all just fun. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the night air clear my mind. The city streets blurred past, neon lights reflecting on the windshield. I replayed Vanessa's words in my head, that simple, almost casual suggestion that I could pay and leave if I was uncomfortable. How many times had I ignored the red flags, the subtle comments, the microaggressions that had piled up over years? How many times had I laughed along, forced myself to be pleasant while feeling smaller inside? Tonight, I had chosen myself, and for the first time in years, that choice felt powerful. By the time I got home, exhaustion set in. I packed a small bag, grabbed some essentials, and made my way to Marcus's place. My friend had always been blunt with me about Vanessa's friends. He had warned me countless times that they were toxic, that Vanessa enabled them, that my patience was being tested in ways I didn't fully realize. Now, sitting on his couch with a cup of strong coffee, I understood exactly what he meant. I felt a mixture of anger, relief, and determination. The messages didn't stop. Vanessa's tone shifted as she tried a different approach, pleading, attempting to negotiate, switching between guilt and manipulation. But I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to reclaim a sense of self I hadn't felt in years. I didn't respond, and slowly, the initial fury from her and her friends gave way to desperation, threats, and ridiculous demands for compensation, emotional restitution, even Venmo payments. It was absurd, and yet it revealed everything I needed to know about the people I had been tolerating. I blocked the numbers, tried to sleep, but sleep was elusive. My mind kept running through scenarios. What if I had stayed? What if I had laughed along? What if I had compromised again? Each thought made me more certain that leaving, however small or symbolic, was the right decision. I realized that this wasn't a one-time issue. This was a pattern. Disrespect, belittling, and manipulation under the guise of friendship and humor. And I had finally said enough. The next morning, Vanessa appeared at Marcus's door. She pounded, called, pleaded, alternating between accusations and emotional appeals. Marcus, to his credit, played the perfect ally, insisting that I wasn't there. She lingered for 20 minutes, refusing to leave, her voice rising as she demanded that I face my responsibilities. Responsibilities. I had fulfilled every single one that mattered. I had paid for my meal, walked away, and protected my belongings. And yet, in her eyes, my responsibility was to endure humiliation and carry the weight of their cruelty. That morning solidified something for me. I couldn't continue to be the silent punchline. I couldn't keep excusing their behavior, pretending it didn't hurt, or believing that love required submission to disrespect. I had chosen myself. I had taken the first step toward a life where my value wasn't determined by the approval or mockery of others. And in that quiet moment, watching Vanessa finally leave Marcus's doorstep, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. The following days were surreal. Vanessa's friends didn't take my departure lightly. Their messages, texts, and calls were relentless, each one more absurd than the last. Accusations flew about how I had humiliated Vanessa, tricked everyone, or been financially abusive by simply following the instructions I had been given. I tried to block them all, but somehow new numbers kept appearing. Each ping on my phone a reminder that I had finally disturbed a carefully maintained ecosystem of mockery and control. The truth, though, was simple. I had paid for my meal, left the table, and claimed my dignity. That was it. Yet, in their eyes, I had committed an unforgivable offense. Vanessa, instead of supporting me or acknowledging the cruelty I had endured for years, had doubled down. Her texts were a mix of pleading, anger, and attempted manipulation, all under the guise of love and reconciliation. I read them carefully, absorbing every word, and slowly the rage inside me morphed into resolve. This wasn't a fight I could win with words. It was about action. I knew I needed to protect what was mine. Over the past few years, my tools, my motorcycles, my projects, everything I had worked for and treasured, had quietly become intertwined with our shared life. And suddenly, I realized the danger. Vanessa had the access, the familiarity, the ability to cross the line. I decided to go back to the apartment, not to confront her, but to secure my belongings. Walking into the place was like stepping into a warped memory. Everything looked normal at first glance, but the silence screamed. Wine bottles scattered across the counter, food containers left open, remnants of the chaos Vanessa and her friends had brewed in my absence. And then, the deeper betrayal revealed itself. My toolbox had been rifled through. Several of my specialty electrical tools were missing, listed for sale on Facebook Marketplace at rock-bottom prices. My Klein voltage tester kits, my Fluke multimeter, even smaller, irreplaceable tools, all up for grabs by strangers online. I felt a cold wash of disbelief, and then my eyes fell on the garage. My '78 Honda CB750, the culmination of months of work, was listed on Craigslist under the vague title, Mechanic Special, Needs Work, $2,000 OBO. That bike wasn't just a possession. It was my passion, my craftsmanship, my late-night dedication. At that moment, the depth of what had been violated hit me fully. This wasn't petty anger or misunderstanding. This was theft, pure and simple. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots, photos, listings, receipts, every piece of evidence that showed the tools and the bike were mine and had been listed for sale without my permission. I called the police non-emergency line, carefully explaining the situation. The response was careful and deliberate. Since we lived together, the situation was legally complicated, but selling someone else's property without permission constituted theft. They advised me to file a report and keep a thorough record. As I worked, my mind cycled between disbelief and a steady, simmering clarity. The friends who had mocked me for years, the girlfriend who had refused to defend me, had now crossed a boundary that could not be ignored. The situation demanded action, not vengeance for the sake of cruelty, but protection of what was mine, preservation of my dignity, and the beginning of a clean break from a toxic environment. The landlord called soon after, requesting a conversation about the lease. Vanessa had painted a distorted narrative, claiming I had abandoned the apartment, refusing to pay rent, and leaving her to manage everything alone. I explained the reality. I had left temporarily to secure my belongings because my property had been threatened. I had every intention of dealing with the lease, but the story Vanessa spun painted me as irresponsible and vindictive. That morning, I began moving my projects to Marcus's garage. Every box I packed, every tool I placed safely, was a step toward reclaiming control over my life. The bike, my tools, the few personal items I had brought into the relationship before Vanessa's intrusion, all were carefully documented and secured. I left the shared possessions untouched, taking only what was indisputably mine. The act itself was therapeutic, a tactile reminder that I still had agency, that I could protect myself when others refused to respect boundaries. Vanessa returned that evening. I was loading the last box into my truck when she arrived, arms crossed, frustration radiating from her posture. Her friends lingered in the background, ready to intervene, to enforce the illusion that I owed obedience, gratitude, or patience. But I stood firm. I explained calmly and without raising my voice why I had moved my things, because my property had been violated and I could no longer trust that it would remain safe. They tried to spin it as theft, as cruelty, as an overreaction. I didn't argue. Actions, not words, were my defense. That night, as I drove away from the apartment with Vanessa and her friends watching from the curb, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Liberation. The weight of constant belittlement, subtle humiliation, and quiet submission lifted. The drive was quiet, the night air crisp against the windshield. And I realized I was beginning a new chapter. One where respect, dignity, and self-preservation were non-negotiable. The next morning, I woke up early at Marcus's place, still feeling the adrenaline from the previous night. Sleep had been shallow, but my mind was unusually clear. I went over every detail from the evening before. The tools that had been sold, the bike that was listed online, Vanessa's texts, the landlord's potential involvement. I knew I needed to approach this systematically. Chaos had ruled the last few days, but order could be restored, and I was determined to be the one to restore it. The first step was documentation. I took extensive photos of the apartment, my project room, and the Craigslist listings for the bike. Screenshots of the Facebook Marketplace sales were backed up on my phone, my cloud, and even printed out, just in case. Every detail counted. If I wanted to protect my property, I needed evidence that couldn't be ignored or disputed. I called the non-emergency police line again to confirm the procedure. The officer listened carefully as I explained that tools and a motorcycle, which were clearly mine, had been listed for sale without permission. They advised filing a report, keeping all documentation, and making note of any interactions that could escalate further. That call, while procedural, gave me a sense of legitimacy. This wasn't about revenge. It was about enforcing the boundary that had been completely disregarded. Then came the landlord. Mr. Chen had been understanding in the past, a reasonable man who knew me as a responsible tenant. Vanessa, predictably, had painted a different picture, claiming I had abandoned the apartment, refused to pay rent, and left her with all responsibilities. I called him, explaining calmly and clearly that I had left temporarily because my property had been violated and that I was in the process of moving my belongings for safekeeping. I confirmed my willingness to handle the lease responsibly. He listened carefully and, to my relief, validated my perspective. He reminded me that one more noise complaint or any further disruption could lead to eviction, but he also acknowledged that Vanessa's actions, bringing friends over, selling property, and creating disturbances, complicated the situation on her end. Mr. Chen encouraged me to document everything and offered advice on how to manage the lease transition if needed. That conversation gave me a sense of security. I wasn't just fighting for dignity, I had legal backing. While dealing with paperwork and documentation, I began moving the remaining items that were undeniably mine to Marcus's garage. Every tool, box, and piece of equipment I loaded felt like reclaiming a part of myself. The bike, my pride and obsession, was transported with extra care, strapped down securely. Nothing else mattered in that moment. The mess at the apartment, Vanessa's escalating messages, or her friends plotting. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of autonomy and control. Thank you for staying with me until the end. How would you have acted in the protagonist's place? Write your thoughts in the comments. More fresh and controversial stories every day on my profile. Like and subscribe to this channel.